Hello and welcome to another End User Talk podcast. I'm your hostess, Jamila, your Lady in Tech. Hello and welcome to the End User Talk podcast. I'm your hostess, Jamila, your Lady in Tech, and thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I've got another great guest. I want to welcome to the podcast Mr. Anthony Bruno. How are you doing today?
Fine. Yourself?
You know what? I'm doing fine. Thank you so much for asking. Before we get started, in the event someone is not aware of who you are, do you mind giving us a brief introduction?
Okay. My name is Anthony Bruno. I am the trail boss of Northeastern Trailriders Association, the owner of Triangle 7 Arena, and also I'm affiliated with the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. I've been participating in that since 1987. And have been in the rodeo industry since 1982, and have been a cowboy horse trainer all my life. So that's a little bit about me.
Now, cowboy. Now, when we think about cowboys, I'm going to be honest. Just based on watching TV, I don't see too many black men associated with the cowboy as a cowboy. Within the rodeo, bull riding, I personally have not seen that. And I'm sure there are countless others who don't correlate black men with the cowboy or just rodeo in general.
That was intentional. That was Hollywood. Well, the reason people don't know about it because Hollywood depicted the cowboy as John Wayne and Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and all those Wyatt Earp and all those people, those Hollywood depicted cowboys. The original cowboys were men of color, Native Americans, as well as African Americans, as well as Caucasian Americans. There was a good multitude of cowboys, and every fourth cowboy was a black cowboy. So history's been taught with how should I say it, vacancies.
Oh, definitely. As you know, we're finding out with so many things. I mean, it's not really that we're finding it out. Some things are being uncovered, I guess, gracefully or slowly in time. But it's just, you would think, being a cowboy, first and foremost, we correlate that primarily with the state of Texas. Now, we know cowboys can be anywhere up in the north, just in various territories, if you will, or parts of the world.
Right.
But,
the first cowboys were developed here. What we know as the American cowboy was developed on a ranch here in Texas called the George Ranch by Dr. Jones. And he had some Spanish cowboys, some vaqueros, Spanish cowboys with his West African slaves, which were herdsmen. And those herdsmen and the vaqueros got together and developed what we know as the American cowboy. There was the horse and the rope and the working cattle, because the West African slaves, they worked cattle off of their own foot with dogs, rocks, sticks, and just whistles and sounds. And they were herdsmen that were brought here for that purpose, for those skills that they had. And then the Spanish were here because they were already here in Mexico, and they were already known horsemen. But there's some stories behind how they got their horsemanship too, as well as like in 700 AD, back when the Moors came over to Spain with horses. So it's a lot of history. It's a lot to calibrate, and it'll get overwhelming if you try to teach it all to you at one time. So it's got to be a little bit at a time, and it's up to us to go and research our history. You know
what? You're right.
Because what they've taught us is not accurate.
Definitely, they, like you said, when you watch Westerns, if you're someone who's interested in Westerns, you don't hear of any black cowboys. Also, or really, to be honest about it, I don't want to, limit it to just, blacks, any of the other races that were involved in this particular, I guess, can I call it rodeo?
It's rodeo is Western heritage is what it is.
Okay.
It's
So,
always
but when you see that, you don't see any other influence.
well, that was done intentionally to devalue us, to make us not value ourselves, and for us to be caught up in the rat race that we are right now by not knowing who we are and where we come from. And that was done intentionally. And right now, when they're trying to start teaching slavery in Texas education and teach that part of history, we've got Greg Abbott, who's the governor of Texas right now, is fighting that. And that's just the same thing they've been doing for decades, altering the education system to keep us from knowing who we are, where we come from, and the systems. It might be ugly, but it's the truth and it's history.
It is. It's definitely,
it's valuable. So when you take away something, you devalue that person that's involved in there. You take that part of them away from them learning about themselves.
and it is definitely something that we, as a people, of course, this is one of our many struggles that we have, is finding our identity. People throw around the word representation a lot. And, if you just think about the word loosely, it is important to have representation. One, if you don't see, a lot of us follow pattern or examples, I know in our initial conversation, our discussion, we talked about how you were introduced, and it's because your father did it. And I'm sure however your father was introduced, this is generational. This is tradition.
Right. It's exactly right. And it's like when right now, when we breed horses because of what their dads or their parents did to get that trait into the next bloodline, and then you find another horse with the same bloodline, and you breed that trait into another horse, so that the babies have those traditional traits, those traits that their parents and their forefathers, their foreparents had, so that they can be more learn that ability more quickly, be more apt to do that ability, whatever the ability is that you're training them for. So it's the same thing in humans. The DNA. My dad knew my great-great-grandfather, and he was born a slave. And the plantation he was on, he was a stable boy. So he worked with the horses and the mules. So my dad knew him, and my dad picked up those traits from him and passed those traits on to me. So it is what it is. And that's what they were doing in slavery. That's why we have athletes who are super athletes and super smart, because they took the best of the best and bred them with the best of the best to get whatever they got. And that's why we are so prominently productive in whatever we decide to do.
That's interesting.
Breeding processes.
Exactly. And it's so interesting. We use the word breeding or being bred parallel with what we do with livestock, with animals.
Because we are livestock.
Exactly. That is so, you know what? But although we were considered livestock, even livestock was more important. Their lives were more important than ours, than our ancestors.
Right.
Boy. Well, I know in our initial conversation, we also, what is the root word, or where did cowboy come?
Well, cowboy is, the word boy is derived from BOY, which is an acronym that was on the sales bills or the sales tickets that they would have in some places where they would have BOY, Black-owned youth. And then they would have house, BOY, field, BOY. And there's also some other. Now, right now, history doesn't depict that way of depicting a boy. But boy was a degrading word even from decades ago. So it was just a description of a black-owned youth. So there was a cowboy, a field boy, a house boy, and that was for male or female at the time. So that's where it came from. And then the Caucasians that you would call the cowboys that were working on the field, working in ranches back then, they didn't want to be called a cowboy. They wanted to be called a wrangler or a ranch hand because they didn't want to be depicted as a boy.
And when you watch some of the, when you look at just footage of any period of our history, when you hear the word boy, now clearly when that word was said to you, it was not an endearing. It wasn't meant to be endearing, nor was it meant to identify your sex, if you will. Mm-hmm. You know, and so when we hear I was so blown away when you told me that there was an acronym for that.
Yeah. Well, the only reason it became popular to be a cowboy is because of our heritage of that 30-year span of that frontier of settling the West. When they got together and they started moving cattle to the east for the railroad, to the rail yards, and then it became popular to be a cowboy because of our tenacity and our skills and the crafts and the things that we were getting a reputation for being, very skilled and crafted. And this was after the Civil War. So this is where a black guy could come and get the same work, same pay, same classification as a white man. So it was like, hey, look, we might as well be cowboys too because they're getting the same money as we are. So, it became a financial thing, and then it became a credibility thing for us. The Western heritage only lasted 30 years. That Western frontier time is only 30, 40 years. So that time is so prominent because of us sustaining America and building a financial market as far as beef. So then it became popular to be a cowboy. So then after that, then they came in with the Western movies and the singing and the songs and all those things that came along with being a cowboy. The singing cowboy, the poetic cowboy, and then later on came the urban cowboy, and then the rodeo cowboy, and then the ranch hand, the working cowboy. So there's several different descriptions of cowboy, but they only came after that 30-year period.
It's always interesting to me when these things are uncovered in our history, American history, U.S. history, whatever you want to call that backbone. It's always interesting that things that were considered beneath or considered servitude roles, how they started out with just us doing it, and it was demeaning. It was intended to be demeaning. And of course, it was never anything that you were supposed to earn. There was no earning. There was no sense of pride. You were just a worker, and that's all you did. You were bred to be a worker until you died, and there was no hope of you ever becoming a ranch hand yourself, owning your own property, owning your own land, with this skill and making it profitable for you and your lineage, your generation. Mm-hmm. But it's always interesting how those roles that were meant to be demeaning for us become something that's so profitable for them.
Yeah.
And then they erase us.
That's the way it's designed. I can tell you a story about George W. Bush, don't you? Not the George W. Bush, the president. George W. Bush was born in around 1777.
I do not, but I'm
1779. He was a freeborn mulatto, which was half black, half white guy, who was born in Pennsylvania. He was raised a Quaker, and his parents lived in Pennsylvania, and they were indebted servants to a guy by the name of Stevenson, and in that process, his mother and father were married, and they weren't supposed to be. They somehow they got married, which was, we weren't supposed to be able to get married back then, as far as black and white. And his mom was Irish, and his dad was black, or Indian, they say, from India. But he was an African. So I don't know how those two coincide, but that's the way they have him described in some different books that I've read. They have him as an Indian as an African American. So I don't know how that came up to be. But his dad's name was Matthew Bush, and he married an Irish woman. And she was the maid of Mr. Stevenson. And Mr. Stevenson didn't have any family. So when he died, he left all his stuff to Matthew Bush and his wife, who were his servants. So they became very wealthy. They were in the fur trading business, and in that process, George Bush was born, and then he moved. He went to the military. He went to the army, and he served under I want to say Jefferson. And he was he served under Jefferson, and he has also helped with the New Orleans Purchase, with the Louisiana Purchase. And in that process, he also was a fur trader. So he was in Oregon. He went to Oregon as a fur trader and worked in the Oregon area under the Hudson Bay Company. And after all, though, I'm just trying to make this story short without going into too deep. But after he was a trapper, he ended up coming back to his parents had moved to Missouri, and after Stevenson died, they moved to Missouri, and they became farmers. And then in that process, while he left and went to the military, and he served under Andrew Jackson. I said Jefferson, but he served under Andrew Jackson, and he worked, and he was in the War of 1812, and he was in the Battle of New Orleans. So that's when they had the Louisiana Purchase. So in that process, he worked under the Hudson Bay Company after he got out of the military. And then he moved back to Missouri and met his wife. And he also was a mulatto, and he wasn't supposed to be able to get married because of his color. And he married a white woman at the time. So there was record that they had gotten married, and she was German. So with them being in Missouri, and Missouri was a slave state, they weren't supposed to be able to get married. So in this process, he had developed a relationship with his neighbors and his community, and he ended up telling them about his trips to Oregon and his trips as his experiences being a trapper and all those things. And he talked about this Oregon territory, how rich the land was. And then he got together with 5 of those families where he was living in Missouri, and they all moved to Oregon. And then they ended up having, because of the laws in Oregon that didn't allow slavery and didn't want to have slavery there, that he wasn't able to buy property there. So he ended up moving across the river. Well, he moved across the river from Oregon to closer to the Canadian border, and in that area, he named that area Bush Prairie. And it was near Puget Sound where he had moved to, and there was a little town called Tombwater. And they had moved there, and he was a black man who was asked to be the wagon boss, or the trail boss of their wagon train. And he was very wealthy at the time because he had saved up his money and managed his money. He ended up moving at 52. He was 52 years old when he finally moved to the Oregon area and Tombwater. And in that process, he helped everybody in his community to get whatever they needed, and to also establish their town. And the town that he established was where the American and Canada, American and British, were at war about their trade, about their traveling back and forth to Canada. So he negotiated a treaty that would allow them to cross over on his property, crossing his property where he was, to go back and forth to Canada. So they were about to go to war about this. So he established a pathway from Canada to America with a treaty instead of war. And so right now the town is still there and it's still established. So there was a lot of black positive things that we were doing and that we don't get credit for. So it's not all about us being enslaved and being demonized or diminished our value, because some of us did do some things, but they're not accurately documented.
Which is why it's...
So George Bush was a black man who was asked to be a wagon boss over 5 families, and it was about 30 people that he went across the country from Missouri to Oregon, then to the Canadian border, to where they finally were able to purchase property. He wasn't given this property; he bought it with his own money. And they said that he had bought the wagons for everybody that went with him, to go along. So it was like he was helping people all the way. And during that era, there was the crops that went bad, and his crops were productive. And somebody offered him a lot of money for his seeds, and he said instead of selling the seeds to the merchants that were going to make money off of it, he said he was just going to give it to his neighbors to keep them eating and surviving and moving on food and growing their own crops. So he was just a good guy, and all the way around, just we weren't taught that history. I had to go and research that for myself, and I got it out of a little third grade book that was being taken out of the library, being discontinued in the library, and it was a book called The Forgotten Blacks of the West. And I got that book, and I read about George W. Bush, so I went and researched some more on him on my own. And it's a lot to try to unfold in just a few minutes. But, it was just like, who knew?
Well, we wouldn't know those things. Just like you're saying, it was by chance that you found that book. And the George Bush I know is, George W. Bush. So I was even misled. I thought I knew something.
And then I thought maybe, there might be some kinship there.
Well, you don't know. We don't know. We do not know. There has to be. How common is it for you to find a black man named George Bush? The only one we know here in Texas is the oil family.
Right.
That's who we know. But
George H. and George W. Bush.
There you go. All of them Bushes. But so there is no way. And this is why this is just so important. I thoroughly enjoyed our first conversation, and you said it at that particular point in time. You need to be pressing record right now. And I really wished I had, but it's so important. And I told you that I was born and raised in Texas. I'm from Lubbock, Texas. And in all honesty, I've only ridden a horse once. I have no idea about what it's like to be on a farm or.
You have to change that horse riding.
Yes, you know what? And I'm definitely going to take you up on that offer, because I'd love to be able to experience that. I didn't grow up. I'm a city girl to the heart, right? So I didn't grow up around livestock of any kind. Everything that I've had has come to me already chopped up and processed, and all we had to do was put it in the pan in the oven and season it and put it on the table. So, growing up in the city, there's so much that you. And now a lot of people would tell me, you're in Lubbock. What do you mean? It wasn't like you were in New York or somewhere.
Right.
But even still, if you didn't grow up in an environment where you knew about agriculture, where you knew about farming, where you knew about livestock, if you didn't, that is still a foreign concept to you.
Well, agribusiness is the business, because without agribusiness, we don't eat. And that's what we do with our Trailriders Association. Our Trailriders Association, we fundraise to give scholarships to kids that go to school in agribusiness, to go to school for anything, veterinary medicine, agricultural sciences, anything, husbandry. If they're going to school for that, we give them a scholarship to help them with those things.
What's ironic?
I had a nephew. He used to laugh at me because I was in agribusiness. He was like, "Oh, you country, you this, that, and the other." And then he ended up going to Prairie View A&M. First, he went to I want to say U of H or something like that, and then he was just steadily getting put behind and not getting ahead. And then he found an opportunity to go to Prairie View, and he went to Prairie View, and he ended up graduating, ended up getting a job with the ag department in Washington D.C. He was a cyber policeman on the cyber. He was the guy who hacks the hackers,
right?
For the ag department. So he ended up working for the ag department, and he moved back home to Texas, and now he's living up in Rosenberg, farming himself. But he laughed at me at first. He's got his own garden, all his own things. But it's something about us being in agriculture that if a man can feed himself, he'll never starve. But if you can have a man depend on you for food, you got him enslaved for the rest of your life.
That's right. And, that's another thing we don't hear. I mean, black farmers, and we know even that industry is, as far as blacks who are doing it, they suffer. They don't get all of the best.
Subsidies.
Yes.
Subsidies that the others do. It's hard for them to get those subsidies. It's just systematic. It's
so unfair. And it makes, it honestly, this gatekeeping is what it's. Who are these gatekeepers? and who are
the citizens of the other gatekeepers that used to be the gatekeepers from the gatekeepers of the gatekeepers?
From the start. From the start, the ones who write the books, the ones who it's institutionalized racism, and it's woven. I mean, it's just in the fibers, and it's just so sad because I'm like, this land is full of opportunity. I mean, you can't do everything. You can't harbor everything. There's enough out here for all of us.
What God's got for you is for you, and you can't take that from him. So what God's got for us is going to come to us, regardless of how they try to keep it from us. Only people can keep it from us is ourselves.
Yes. Not being informed and not fighting,
right.
and doing things like the Northeastern Trailriders Association. I think that everything that you're doing, especially now, with our black youth, and I'm not gonna exclude females because some of our young women are kind of misdirected, and sometimes we're lost, as women. But it's very, very important. These are the things that they need to be, their eyes need to be open to, because they don't feel like there's opportunity out there. And yes, they think being riding horses is country, but I can just about imagine how freeing that is too.
It is liberating. My oldest daughter was a barrel racer, and that helped her develop her skills as far as being on task. And being organized, and she's very successful right now. Matter of fact, she's moving back home from Atlanta this weekend. But she didn't realize how much that helped her as far as her learning ability and her school lessons, as far as riding a horse, kept her on task.
When you're growing up and you're one of these lucky individuals to actually have a family that has this background or this history in something, whether it's military.
Just access.
Yeah, it's, so many people are trying to run away from the family business.
Right.
You spend... Yeah, it's, what, I don't want to do that because it doesn't look noble. It
right.
It looks hard. It doesn't look.
It is hard. It is hard. But
what is work? What's the definition of work?
If there's no struggle, there's no progress.
There you go. Work is not being leisure. Now, as a result of work, you might find you some leisure time.
Leisure time, exactly.
Let's talk about you and how was there ever any point in your boyhood journey up to manhood that you felt, I'll just say in the younger portion before, because we know where you ended up. Was there ever any point that you felt like I didn't want to continue this journey that my father and my grandfather and the grandfather before his father before him? That you didn't want?
Because I still want to do it now, but I have to work to be able to do it because we weren't blessed enough to be able to have. We got cattle and we've got horses, but we weren't able to establish ourselves enough where I could just do this full time. Because that's my ultimate passion, to be able to do this full time, just do horses and train horses and train people on horses. And that is my ultimate goal as far as when I retire from work that I'm going to do. But there was never a time when I didn't want to do. I did this when I was training horses before I even knew I was training horses. My dad had a facility on the north side of Houston, where people would bring their horses and I would ride them and show them different things and teach them stuff. And I was learning from my dad's friends who were horsemen and training horses when I was a teenager. I was a kid. Before I even knew I was even training horses, I was training horses. And I used to sneak. We used to live on the northeast part of town in Houston, and there were several rodeo arenas scattered throughout the black community back then. And I used to sneak and go to the rodeo arena, which was a bicycle ride away from our house on Hirsch Road. And it was, I want to say Diamond L Arena. It was owned by a guy by the name of Cass and Shorty Richards. And I used to go over there and help those guys push their cattle when they got ready to rope and do whatever I could do just to be around that horse and cowboy, that rodeo scene. And when I got a chance to join the ag department in high school, I was in ag for 4 years from the 9th to the 12th grade. And I just always wanted to be around horses and cattle. And that's just something that I learned as I got older, that it was bred in me. From listening to my dads and them talk about their great-great-grandfather being a horse trainer and a mule trainer, and how he could knock a mule out with one hit with his hand. And just those things, me sitting underneath the table listening to them, because they didn't really want to talk about their history in front of us. It was just some things that they didn't talk about in front of us. As a matter of fact, my dad spoke Creole. So we didn't learn Creole because they were having limited conversation. They didn't want us to learn a lot of that stuff because they were ashamed of it. But it's nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, you know what? That is interesting too. It's just a lot of our history is harbored or kept from us because of the root. You know, the root of our history is so traumatic. Yeah. You know, it's painful. It's and it's a lot of that from our elders, our ancestors. They wanted to forget.
Right.
They didn't want to relive that pain and to continue, because it was reliving for them, for them to.
Excuse me, but in that process, you got to understand what the Caucasians think. They don't want to rehash that ugly, dark history because it's so painful. It's probably painful for them too, because they weren't there. It was their forefathers who were there, but they still reaping the benefits of it. But it's still got to be painful because you didn't. If you really look back and see how cruel and ugly it was, you were taking people away from them, taking their kids away from them, and selling them off, and beating them, and not half feeding them. Just working them till their bones fall off, till they fall apart, the joints. Things like that, and if you're a descendant of that, you don't want that. You don't want that ugly history brought back up. But it's our history. It is what it is. America would not be what it is if it wasn't for that ugly, dark history.
That's true, and just you said earlier, in the midst of that darkness, that ugliness, we've got something beautiful here.
Exactly.
We've got something great. We've got something that we can find a sense of pride, a sense of purpose. Even identity, in some way, we can find our identity. And some of it is going to be just a matter of, reinventing, rebuilding, in order to find your way. But yes, the history definitely is something that is, it is difficult to hear, and to handle. Now, I want to hear more about your father and his father, but I have to be honest. I became aware of you because I was watching a Netflix documentary titled "High on the Hog," and I have to tell you, I really enjoyed that documentary, and every once in a while I'll look for something because I want to know about our history, and it is kind of difficult every once in a while to come upon some of these accounts of our history in order to get to the root of how this thing happened and how we got here and why certain people are elevated and why certain things are being scrubbed. It is hurtful. Mm-hmm. It is painful, but I really enjoyed the way that documentary went back from when we were taken as slaves, our ancestors, and then how when we were brought here in all these different areas and how we were assigned to do different things. There were so many things that were eye-opening to me. Okra. I didn't know okra was not here. In it was Africa.
Yeah.
The sweet potato, or actually, I'm sorry, the yam.
Yeah.
The yam. I didn't know these things, and then we get to your portion of that story, and we're talking about cowboys and what derived from us. Right. You think bull riding came from them? That's what I'm talking about. We thought they were the ones, and we're just trying to keep up and show them that, hey,
we're trying to muscle in on their trade.
Yeah. It's like basketball. Basketball was ours. And it's when you're looking at these things, and I hate to call things stories because they're not stories, they're accounts. These things were people's experiences. An account is a better depiction of those people's experiences, whoever they are. But it was so eye-opening. It was so uplifting and empowering to see, the history that you have and what you are doing in order to make certain that we keep our story, the cowboy story, the Black cowboy story alive. And I'm grateful that I actually saw that documentary, and it was amazing for me.
Yeah, we have one of the last Black-owned rodeo arenas in Houston, within the city limits, and we've been there for since 82, so 34, 35 years, and so and there's a lot of Black cowboys that have come through our facility, and cowgirls. We were known for the all-girls rodeo from 83 until 1999, and we put that on every year in Memorial Day weekend. So that's just something that we used to do as far as having Black cowboys and Black rodeos. We've been doing that as long as I've been old enough to be able to participate.
Let's talk about the bull riding.
I can tell you a little bit more about the still wrestling. I'll tell you about the still wrestling.
Let's do it. I want to hear about it.
Still wrestling was developed by a guy by the name of Bill Pickett. And Bill Pickett worked on the 101 Ranch. Well, Bill Pickett grew up along the Chisholm Trail, along one of the cattle drive trails. And he witnessed a cow dog, go and grab a bull by the nozzle, by his face, muzzle, and turn him and pin him down where he wouldn't move. So as Bill Pickett learned how to do, he watched the dog do that. He developed it himself to be able to do the same things that the dogs did. And so one day he was out at the 101 Ranch, working on the ranch, and so the story goes is that the steer ran off, and Bill ran his horse alongside of him, jumped off of him, and did that bulldog and deal on him with his mouth, with his teeth. And so that developed what we now know as steer wrestling. But we don't. The guys are now they cleaned it up and dressed it up. They don't bite them with their teeth anymore. They just grab them by the horns and the muzzle and turn them around and flip them. So Bill Pickett learned that as a kid and developed it. He was a little bitty man. So they called him the Dusty Demon, or the Dusty Demon, and he was, because the dust that came out of him, he was so vigorous about what he was doing. They called him Dusty Demon. So and bull riding was something that guys would just do for the fun of it. That the Black guys that were working on the ranches would just do it for the fun. But they didn't have any rigging. They would just ride them with a rope and their hands and legs. So some guys that were competing back then, they were so good that it was just like that they wouldn't even allow them to even compete with which was the RCA. It wasn't the PRCA then. It was the real Rodeo Cowboy Association. And the way you would get into that is the association would have to be invited in by two white cowboys. The two cowboys have to invite you in to the association. So the first Black guy to be able to be known as a professional bull rider was Murtis Dykeman Sr. And Murtis Dykeman Sr., he opened the door for the black cowboys to be able to compete as far as in the rodeo circuit. Because one day he rode a bull that was called Measles, and this bull had never been ridden. And then in the newspaper the next day they showed that Measles had been ridden. And the people of the town got upset because they didn't get to see it. And they were like, they went back to the promoter and said, what happened? Who rode this bull? We didn't get to see him. And they were raising a lot of sand about it. So what they were able to do was, in that process, what the promoters did after that, they would have to be able to keep the people satisfied and keep them coming to their rodeos. They said that they would, if they bucked a black guy, if a black guy participated in the rodeo, after the rodeo, they would have to keep the other participants from whatever event that they were in after the rodeo too. So they would be able to allow them to be able to come to the spectators to stay and see if a black guy competed or whatever, but they were going to be with two white guys there as well. So Murtis Dykeman was the first guy to open the door for us to get into the pro rodeo circuit.
That's interesting that you mentioned that too, because I know here where I'm in my part, we have the regular rodeo, and then we have the black rodeo.
Right.
Why is that?
Because we wanted a place to have our own rodeos for ourselves, because we had our own things going on. We were doing our own rodeos. We didn't necessarily depend on the white people to give us a venue. So we had what they call midnight rodeos or black rodeos, and they would be held at other facilities, like on the ranch, where they would build a rodeo arena on a property where they would be able to have a black rodeo. It was just because we weren't welcome, we didn't worry about it. We just created our own.
That sounds about right. It definitely sounds about right. We're not allowed to participate in something, to me, that should be all inclusive. And in order for you not to have to jump through those hoops, we'll create our own. Now, the popularity of the black rodeo, how popular is it? I mean, do we get the spectatorship and the support?
We used to back in the 80s, and then came in crack. And then after that, it went down for a little while, but now it's coming back. I'm just keeping it real. During that era of us not being in tune with ourselves, we were concentrating on other things, and not worried about our history or our value of our history, then we were doing other stuff. It's hard to get, even the white rodeos, they have to have a draw ticket to get people to come to it as far as other additional entertainment, as far as the musical side. And what we would do, we would bring in Zydeco, because that's the Louisiana cowboy version of folk music.
Okay.
So that's the cowboys, the black cowboys of Louisiana. That's their type of music, Zydeco. So we would have a Zydeco entertainment in the middle or after the rodeo to give us another draw card to get people to come and watch the cowboys participate. Because a lot of people didn't know that there were black cowboys out there. So you had to have another draw ticket to get them to come. And once you get them there, then you keep them with the entertainment of the rodeo and the musical entertainment.
Well, I do want to know, I want to talk about just what you're doing specifically, and what exactly do you need in order to keep things going, whether that's rebuilding. I even hear, just as far as owning stables, it can be very expensive in order for the upkeep and maintenance of the daily functions of a stable. But how are you keeping things afloat, and what do you need going forward?
Well, some help. Right now, what I've been working out of my pocket, just fundraising and for having rodeos and having trail rides and things of that nature, and just using that money to keep our place afloat. So if there's somebody with a grant out there that would help me keep our heritage, that would help us keep that heritage alive, I'd love to be introduced to that, because that's what my ultimate goal is. And right now, I would need some help, with tractors to help me keep my facility and my grounds right. And I would need somebody to help me keep my grass cut and things like that, just to keep the place up to par, and painting and maintenance and welding and all those things that help keep the arena going and to keep the barn able to contain horses or whatever. That's a good question. I never thought about what I really needed other than just some bodies to come and help me keep my barn afloat, change the tin when the tin goes out, when the roof starts leaking, things of that nature.
And I definitely understand it. Maintenance and upkeep. We definitely know you need bodies, you need hands, you definitely you're always going to need money in some form or fashion. So I appreciate you for sharing that. What I want to know also, so in the event someone wants to, whether that's volunteer or offer any type of aid, resources, where can they send the information? How?
They can contact me, Anthony Bruno, and my cell phone number is 713-530-7986, or they can email me at ajbruno65@gmail.com.
All right, that was ajbruno65@gmail.com.
Yes, ma'am. ajbruno65@gmail.com.
Perfect. You know what? I do appreciate you for your time. I value and I appreciate you for everything that you're doing. I've learned a lot myself just within this conversation, this discussion here. I appreciate you and your family, and then just your desire to keep this thing going and keeping it alive. And is there anyone that you want to pay homage to, thank, or any information you'd like to share with us about what's going on now, projects, or what you plan on doing in the future?
Well, I'd like to give homage to my dad and the founders of Northeastern Trailriders Association. There were 13 members, and I can't remember all their names off the top of my head, but I'd like to give homage to those people and all the cowboys that came before me that I learned from and kept it, and I'm vowing to keep the craft alive and paying homage to them as well.
I'm going to keep in touch with you, Mr. Bruno, because I want to make certain that I get as much information about where the Northeastern Trailriders Association is doing. And you all are out of Houston, Texas. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am. We're out of Houston,
okay.
But we start our ride in Beaumont because it's set up along the trail that the blacks followed as far as when they were moving to Texas from Louisiana. We come up Old 90 into some old black communities that were developed as they settled during their migration from slavery.
Okay, well, I'm definitely going to, when this podcast is available, I'm going to make certain, hopefully the website will be up, or at least if not the website, the Facebook page will be back
active.
Yes, because I want to make certain that everybody is able to, anyone who's interested, whether that's you wanting to offer resources or if you have any information about resources that can help Mr. Anthony Bruno, I would greatly appreciate it. And I know he would, or if you just have questions on how you can be of assistance, these are things that we definitely need to keep alive for just our future, for our present. And then, we got to keep our history going. We have to keep that going. And hey, who wouldn't like riding a horse,
Once you get on, they say the outside of the horse is the best thing for the inside of a man.
See? Okay, then I'm going to have to get down to Houston and I'm going to have to get this done. Mr. Bruno, thank you so much. And you know what I didn't get? Please share with us your father's name, the man that made this all happen for you.
Joseph S. Bruno.
And how is he doing?
He's doing well. He has emphysema. My dad is tough as nails. My dad has had cancer, heart attack, strokes, and emphysema, and he's still here, 87 years old, still driving on, still giving me instructions, still teaching me, and just just an awesome man. Awesome.
He was actually featured in the documentary as well, wasn't he?
Yes, ma'am, he was, and he was giving instructions then.
Yes, he was. Just as he should, a cowboy at the heart. Yes.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad you know what? Hey, 87 years young, that is definitely, and he's able still to get around and still garnering the respect that he definitely deserves from you and everybody that is in his, in his space, so that's definitely something we've got to hold on to. Definitely. Exactly. Well, you are welcome back anytime. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
You know what? It's been an ultimate pleasure and a treat for me to be here speaking with you today, and you right up the road. So I'm definitely keeping in touch. And but thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to try to look into some things too to hopefully be able to help you get the resources that you're looking for. I do want to stay in touch so that we can make sure that we can get this ball rolling. But you stay safe. You stay safe and have a good rest of your day. And thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
Well, thank you very much.
We've come to the close of another episode of the End User Talk podcast. I hope that what you've heard today will leave you feeling empowered. Thank you for listening. And remember, every day's a training day.